I exposed my fake daughter-in-law in front of my son at Christmas dinner who owes me pays me. The silence that followed the video was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting down the seconds until Jessica's world crumbled forever. 23 faces stared at the television screen in horror, watching my daughter-in-law's own recorded voice confessing to planning my murder while my son sat frozen, his fork still halfway to his mouth, gravy dripping onto his Christmas sweater. The detective standing in my doorway smiled as he pulled out the handcuffs. My name is Margaret O'Sullivan, and I am 60 years old. For the past 3 years, I believed I had gained not just a daughter-in-law, but a true daughter of the heart. Jessica seemed to love me in ways my own son David never quite managed, calling me mom from day one, bringing me flowers every Sunday, spending hours listening to my stories about her late father-in-law. She was everything I had hoped for in a daughter-in-law and more. What I didn't know was that every smile, every hug, every sweet gesture was part of the most calculated con job I've ever witnessed. The morning I discovered the truth started like any other December day in Boston. I was in my kitchen, making my famous cinnamon rolls for the family Christmas gathering that evening. The smell of brown sugar and spice filled my brownstone home on Beacon Hill, the same house where I had raised David alone after his father died in that car accident 25 years ago. I was humming White Christmas when I realized I had forgotten to print the family photos Jessica had asked me to display during dinner. She was always so thoughtful about including family memories in our celebrations. I walked upstairs to my small office, planning to use the computer David had set up for me last year. He was always insisting I needed to be more modern, more connected. If only he knew how connected I was about to become to information that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my perfect little family. The laptop was still open from the night before when Jessica had used it to look up recipes. She had mentioned wanting to help with Christmas breakfast, such a sweet gesture from such a caring girl. As I moved the mouse to wake the screen, I noticed several browser windows were still open. Without thinking much of it, I started to close them one by one. That's when I saw it. A folder on the desktop labeled Operation Inheritance that hadn't been there yesterday. My heart started beating faster, though I told myself it was probably some work project of Jessica's. She worked in estate planning, after all. Surely this was just a professional file she had forgotten to transfer to her own computer. But something deep in my grandmother's intuition told me to look closer. When I clicked on the folder, my world tilted on its axis. Screenshots filled my vision, dozens of them, showing text messages between Jessica and phone numbers I didn't recognize. The first image made my blood run cold. There was a picture of me from Thanksgiving, taken when I thought no one was watching, with cruel comments typed below it. They called me an old hag, a walking corpse, a burden that needed to disappear. I scrolled through message after message, each one more devastating than the last. There were screenshots of conversations between Jessica and David, my own son, discussing how they couldn't wait for me to die so they could sell the house and split the money. They had calculated my life expectancy, researched nursing homes with the highest mortality rates, and even joked about how my heart medication might be accidentally doubled. The casual way they discussed ending my life, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenient obstacle to their financial freedom, left me gasping for air. The room around me seemed to spin as I continued clicking through the evidence of their betrayal. There were photos of legal documents they had forged, including a new will that left everything to David while cutting out the charitable organizations I had planned to remember. They had been planning this for years, systematically isolating me from friends, convincing me that family was all I needed, all while plotting the best way to accelerate my departure from this world. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse, but I forced myself to continue. If I was going to confront this betrayal, I needed to understand the full scope of what they had done. What I found next made me realize this wasn't just a simple case of greed. Jessica wasn't just a gold-digging daughter-in-law. She was something much more dangerous. Hidden deeper in the folder were documents showing Jessica's real identity. Her name wasn't even Jessica Martinez, the name she had used when David introduced us. Her real name was Sarah Jenkins, and she had a history that read like a horror movie script. 3 previous marriages, all to older wealthy men, all ending in sudden deaths that had been ruled accidental. Heart attacks, falls downstairs, medication mix-ups. The pattern was undeniable, and I was clearly intended to be victim number 4. I found communications with someone called Marcus, who appeared to be her partner in these long-term cons. They discussed my routines, my health conditions, my medication schedule with the precision of medical professionals planning a surgery. They knew about my mild heart condition before I had ever mentioned it to Jessica. They knew about my sleeping patterns, my exercise routines, even my grocery shopping schedule. They had been studying me like a laboratory specimen, preparing for the perfect moment to eliminate me without suspicion. The most chilling discovery was an audio recording Jessica had made of herself practicing different scenarios. Her sweet, loving voice transformed into something cold and calculating as she rehearsed how she would sound when calling 911 to report finding my body. She practiced crying, practiced confusion, practiced grief. She had even researched which funeral homes would give her the best prices for a simple burial service. But what truly broke my heart wasn't the evidence of their intention to kill me. It was the discovery of how long they had been laughing at me behind my back. Screenshots showed months of conversations where they mocked everything about me. My cooking, which Jessica had always praised so effusively, was described as disgusting slop that she had to force herself to eat. My stories about their grandfather, which she had seemed to love hearing, were referred to as boring ramblings from a senile old woman. Every moment of joy I had felt with her had been a performance, and they had found my genuine love for her absolutely hilarious. I sat in that chair for 3 hours, reading every single document, viewing every single image, listening to every recorded conversation. By the end, I understood that I wasn't just dealing with a greedy daughter-in-law and an ungrateful son. I was dealing with professional criminals who had made a career out of murdering elderly people for their money. The scope of their operation was massive, involving fake identities, forged documents, and a network of accomplices who helped them move from victim to victim across the country. The immediate shock gave way to something I hadn't felt in 25 years. Pure, crystalline rage. Not the hot anger of a moment's frustration, but the cold, calculating fury of someone who has been pushed beyond their breaking point. They thought they were dealing with a weak, naive old woman who could be easily manipulated and disposed of. They had no idea what they had awakened. You see, there were things about Margaret O'Sullivan that my dear son David had never bothered to learn about his own mother. Before I married his father and became a housewife devoted to raising my family, I had worked for 15 years as an investigative accountant specializing in fraud detection. I had helped the FBI uncover embezzlement schemes worth millions of dollars. I had tracked down con artists across state lines and helped put them in prison. The skills that had made me successful in that career hadn't disappeared just because I chose to focus on being a mother and wife. Moreover, they had no idea about the resources at my disposal. While they were planning to inherit my modest brownstone and what they assumed were small savings accounts, they were completely unaware of the investment portfolio I had built over 4 decades. The life insurance settlement from my husband's death, carefully invested and compounded over 25 years, had grown into a substantial fortune. I owned properties in 3 states, held significant stock positions in 12 companies, and maintained business relationships with some of the most powerful people in Boston's legal and financial communities. But most importantly, they had underestimated something that had nothing to do with money or professional skills. They had underestimated the fury of a mother who discovers her own son wishes she was dead. As I sat there in my office, staring at the evidence of their betrayal, a plan began forming in my mind. Not a plan for simple revenge or immediate confrontation, but a comprehensive strategy that would expose their crimes, protect other potential victims, and ensure they faced justice for everything they had done. If Jessica wanted to play a long game, I would show her how a real expert plays the long game. I began by carefully documenting everything I had found, making copies of all files and storing them in multiple secure locations. Then I started my own investigation, using resources they couldn't even imagine I had access to. I contacted my former colleagues in the FBI, people who owed me favors from cases we had worked together decades ago. I reached out to private investigators I had worked with, former police detectives who now ran security firms, forensic accountants who specialized in tracking financial crimes across state lines. Within 48 hours, I had a team of professionals quietly building a case that would not only expose Jessica and David's plans for my murder but would connect them to their previous crimes across multiple states. We traced financial records, analyzed phone communications, tracked travel patterns, and built a timeline that clearly showed their pattern of targeting and killing elderly victims. But I wanted more than just justice. I wanted them to experience the complete destruction of everything they had built, just as they had planned for me. I wanted David to understand exactly what he had thrown away when he chose money over his own mother. I wanted Jessica to face not just legal consequences but social humiliation and public exposure that would make it impossible for her to ever rebuild her life. The plan I developed was more sophisticated than anything they could have imagined. While they were focused on their crude murder plot, I was orchestrating a multi-layered campaign that would destroy them professionally, personally, socially, and legally. Every aspect of their lives would crumble simultaneously, leaving them with nothing but the realization that they had been completely outmaneuvered by the old woman they had so drastically underestimated. As I finalized my preparations, I made one decision that surprised even me. I wouldn't run away or hide from their Christmas dinner invitation. Instead, I would attend their gathering, smile, and play the role of the loving mother and mother-in-law one final time, all while knowing that in a few hours, their entire world would explode. The irony was perfect. They planned to use family celebrations to mask their crimes, so I would use their own family celebration to expose them. The invitation they had extended for Christmas dinner at my house, the same house they planned to inherit after my convenient death, would become the stage for the most spectacular downfall either of them could imagine. Every family member they had planned to fool, every friend whose sympathy they had hoped to gain, every person they had counted on to support them through their fake grief would witness the complete revelation of who they really were. As I prepared for what would be the most important performance of my life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt powerful. For the first time since my husband died, I felt like the formidable woman I had once been, the investigator who had never failed to catch her target, the strategist who could see 20 moves ahead while her opponents were still trying to figure out the rules of the game. Jessica and David thought they were playing chess with a pigeon. They were about to discover they were playing chess with a grandmaster who had been studying their moves from the very beginning. Christmas dinner was going to be very interesting indeed. Everything had to be perfect for Christmas dinner. I woke up at 5 in the morning, not because I had to, but because excitement was coursing through my veins like electricity. Today was the day I would watch Jessica Martinez, or Sarah Jenkins, or whoever she really was, realize that the sweet little old lady she thought she could murder had been 10 steps ahead of her from the moment she discovered the truth. I spent the morning cooking as if my life depended on it, which in a strange way, it did. Every dish had to be exactly what the family expected from their traditional Christmas celebration. The honey-glazed ham that David had loved since childhood. The stuffing recipe that had been passed down from my grandmother. The cranberry sauce made from scratch because Jessica had once mentioned, in what I now knew was fake enthusiasm, how much she loved homemade cranberry sauce. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was preparing what would essentially be their last meal as free people. Jessica would be eating dinner in a jail cell tomorrow night, and David would be starting the process of rebuilding a life without any family, any money, or any reputation to fall back on. But today, they would enjoy one final feast before their world collapsed around them. As I worked in the kitchen, I kept thinking about all the family dinners where Jessica had sat at my table, eating my food, accepting my love, all while planning my death. I thought about David, the son I had raised alone after his father died, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, who now spent his evenings calculating how long I might live and whether it was worth speeding up the process. The rage that fueled my actions wasn't hot and destructive. It was cold and focused, the kind of anger that transforms into devastating precision. Around noon, I received a text message from Detective Rodriguez, my contact at the Boston Police Department, confirming that everything was in place for the evening's operation. The federal agents were positioned. The district attorney was standing by with arrest warrants. The evidence we had compiled was so overwhelming that the prosecutors were confident they could secure convictions not just for conspiracy to commit murder, but for the deaths of Jessica's 3 previous husbands. I had spent 3 days building the most comprehensive criminal case anyone had ever assembled against serial killers, and tonight would be the culmination of that effort. But the legal justice was only part of what I had planned. The other part involved something far more personal and far more devastating. I had spent weeks creating what I called my holiday gift to the family. A compilation video that would be my masterpiece of exposure and humiliation. Working with a friend's granddaughter who was studying digital media at Emerson College, I had created a 20-minute video that told the complete story of Jessica's deception and David's betrayal. It featured audio recordings of their most damning conversations, screenshots of their most cruel text messages, documentation of Jessica's real identity and criminal history, and financial records showing exactly how they had planned to steal and divide my assets after my death. But the genius of the video wasn't just in its content. It was in its presentation. I had structured it like a documentary, complete with professional narration, dramatic music, and expert testimony from the FBI agents who had investigated Jessica's previous crimes. It looked like something that could have aired on a major television network, not like a homemade video created by a vengeful old woman in her spare bedroom. The video opened with family photos from happier times, showing Jessica and David at various gatherings, smiling and laughing with me, creating the impression of a loving family. Then it slowly peeled back the layers of deception, revealing the text messages where they mocked my appearance, the audio recordings where they planned my death, the financial documents showing their theft, and the criminal records proving Jessica's identity as a serial killer. The emotional impact was devastating. By the end of the video, any viewer would understand not just that these people were criminals, but that they were monsters who had preyed on the love and trust of an innocent woman. The contrast between the loving family scenes at the beginning and the evidence of their cruelty at the end was designed to leave viewers feeling sick to their stomachs. I had made multiple copies of the video and arranged for it to be simultaneously posted on every social media platform, sent to every news organization in Boston, and distributed to every person in our social circle. By the time the police finished arresting Jessica and David, their faces and their crimes would be known to everyone they had ever met or worked with. They would become infamous, not just as criminals, but as the kind of people who betray the deepest bonds of family love for money. As the afternoon wore on, family members began arriving for dinner. My sister Patricia came first, bringing her famous apple pie and her endless questions about Jessica's latest job promotion. My cousin Michael arrived with his wife and 3 children, the little ones excited to show me their Christmas artwork. David's best friend James came with his new girlfriend, eager to introduce her to the family matriarch they had heard so much about. Each arrival was bittersweet. These people had no idea they were walking into what would become the most talked about family dinner in Boston's social circles for years to come. They had no idea that in a few hours, they would witness the complete destruction of 2 people they thought they knew and trusted. They had no idea that the sweet grandmother serving them homemade cookies had spent the week orchestrating one of the most sophisticated takedowns in criminal history. David and Jessica arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, as they always did. David hugged me with what seemed like genuine warmth, telling me how much he appreciated everything I did for the family. Jessica presented me with a beautiful bouquet of winter roses and a card expressing her gratitude for my unconditional love and support. She looked stunning in her red holiday dress, her smile radiant as she greeted each family member with enthusiasm and affection. Watching her perform was fascinating now that I knew it was all an act. Every gesture was calculated to reinforce her image as the perfect daughter-in-law. Every conversation was carefully steered to topics that would make her appear thoughtful and caring. Every interaction with the children was designed to show her maternal instincts and family values. She was a master manipulator, and I had to admit that her skills were impressive even as I prepared to destroy her. During cocktails, I found myself studying David's face, searching for any sign of guilt or discomfort about the plans he had made for my murder. There was nothing. He laughed at family jokes, shared stories about work, and played with his young cousins exactly as he had done at every family gathering for the past 30 years. Either he was as skilled an actor as his wife, or he had completely compartmentalized his plans to kill his own mother. The conversation during dinner was typical holiday fare. Patricia updated everyone on her retirement travels. Michael's wife shared news about their eldest daughter's college acceptance. James discussed his plans to propose to his girlfriend after the holidays. Jessica contributed to every conversation with perfect timing and appropriate enthusiasm, playing her role as the beloved family member with Academy Award-worthy skill. But I noticed things others missed. The way Jessica's eyes constantly surveyed the room, cataloging valuable objects and mentally calculating their worth. The way she asked seemingly innocent questions about my health and my daily routines that were actually intelligence gathering for her murder plans. The way she subtly encouraged family members to share information about their own financial situations, always filing away details that might be useful for future cons. As we finished the main course and I began clearing dishes, Jessica jumped up to help as she always did, playing the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law. But tonight, I saw her differently. Every move was calculated to reinforce her image as someone who couldn't possibly be capable of the crimes I knew she had committed. The helpful gestures, the compliments about the meal, the affectionate touches on my arm were all elements of a performance designed to maintain the relationships she needed to execute her plans. When we returned to the dining room for dessert, I made my announcement. I told everyone I had prepared a special Christmas surprise, a video presentation featuring family memories and holiday messages. The room erupted in excited chatter as I walked to the television and inserted the USB drive containing my masterpiece of revenge. The video began innocently enough, with photos of recent family gatherings and cheerful holiday music. Everyone smiled and pointed out their favorite moments captured in the photos. Jessica and David both seemed genuinely pleased with what they assumed would be a sentimental journey through recent family history. But then the music stopped. The photos disappeared. And Jessica's own voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakable, discussing the best methods for murdering an elderly person without raising suspicion. The silence that followed was so complete it was like everyone in the room had stopped breathing simultaneously. For the next 20 minutes, 23 people sat frozen in their chairs, watching the complete exposure of Jessica's true identity and David's participation in planning my death. They heard the audio recordings of Jessica practicing her grief-stricken widow performance. They saw the text messages where she and David calculated how long I was likely to live and whether they should speed up my death. They learned about the 3 previous husbands Jessica had murdered in exactly the same way she planned to murder me. The reactions were everything I had hoped for and more. Patricia began sobbing uncontrollably when she heard David's voice discussing whether my heart medication might be accidentally increased. Michael's wife actually vomited when the video revealed the details of how Jessica's previous victims had died. James stood up and took a step away from David as if he were physically dangerous, which of course he was. But the most satisfying reactions came from David and Jessica themselves. David went through what appeared to be the complete stages of grief in fast forward. Denial, as he tried to claim the recordings were fake. Anger, as he accused me of violating his privacy. Bargaining, as he attempted to explain that everything had been taken out of context. Depression, as the full scope of his situation became clear. And finally, acceptance, as he realized that his life as he knew it was over. Jessica's reaction was more interesting because it was more calculated. Even caught red-handed with indisputable evidence of multiple murders, she was still trying to find an angle to work, still looking for some way to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She tried claiming that someone had hacked her phone and planted the messages. She suggested that the audio recordings had been created using artificial intelligence to fake her voice. She even attempted to convince the family that this was all an elaborate misunderstanding that could be resolved with proper legal representation. But her performance fell apart when the video reached its climax. The section where it revealed her true identity and showed photos of her previous 3 victims, all wealthy elderly men who had died under suspicious circumstances after marrying a woman who looked exactly like her. When the faces of those murdered men appeared on screen, along with police reports detailing the investigations into their deaths, Jessica finally stopped talking and started looking toward the exits. That's when Detective Rodriguez rang the doorbell. I excused myself from the table with a smile, as if I were simply answering the door for another late-arriving family member. When I returned with 3 police officers and 2 federal agents, the room erupted in chaos. Children were crying, adults were shouting questions, and Jessica was actually attempting to climb out a window in her red holiday dress. The arrests were swift and professional. Jessica was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, identity fraud, and multiple counts of murder in the first degree related to her previous husbands. David was charged as an accessory to conspiracy to commit murder and with multiple financial crimes related to the forged documents they had prepared to steal my assets. As the police led them away in handcuffs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction or triumph, but a profound sadness for what my family had lost. Not just the criminals who were being arrested, but the relationships and trust that had been destroyed by their betrayal. The family members watching this unfold would never be able to look at holiday gatherings the same way again. The innocence of our family bonds had been poisoned by the revelation that some people are capable of betraying even the deepest love for money. But mixed with the sadness was something else. Relief. For the first time in months, I could sleep without wondering if I would wake up in the morning. I could eat meals without wondering if someone had tampered with my food. I could trust my instincts about people instead of doubting myself because someone I loved was manipulating my perceptions. I was free from the threat that had been hanging over my life without me even knowing it existed. The aftermath of that Christmas dinner was everything I had planned and more. Within 24 hours, the video had been viewed by over 2 million people across various social media platforms. News organizations picked up the story, describing it as one of the most shocking cases of family betrayal in recent memory. Jessica's previous victims' families came forward with additional evidence, strengthening the case against her and ensuring that she would spend the rest of her life in prison. David's professional life was immediately destroyed. His law firm fired him the morning after his arrest, and the State Bar Association began proceedings to strip him of his license to practice law. His social circle evaporated overnight as friends and colleagues realized they had been socializing with someone who had planned to murder his own mother for money. His romantic life was equally destroyed, as no woman would consider dating someone notorious for planning matricide. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the complete collapse of their financial schemes. All the assets they had planned to steal from me were protected by legal trusts I had established. Moreover, I had changed my will to leave my entire estate to organizations that support elderly victims of financial fraud, ensuring that my wealth would be used to prevent exactly the kinds of crimes Jessica and David had committed. The house they had coveted, the house where they had planned their celebration dinner after my murder, became the location of their public humiliation and arrest. The investment accounts they had been counting on to fund their future were donated to establish a foundation that would help other elderly people recognize and escape from similar cons. The comfortable retirement they had planned to enjoy at my expense transformed into decades of prison sentences and social disgrace. In the weeks that followed, I received hundreds of messages from people across the country who had watched the video and recognized similar patterns in their own families. Elderly parents who had felt something was wrong with their children's new spouses. Adult children who had noticed their elderly parents being isolated from friends and family. Family members who had observed subtle changes in their loved ones' behavior after new people entered their lives. My story became a cautionary tale, but also an empowering one. It showed that elderly people are not helpless victims waiting to be preyed upon by criminals. It demonstrated that underestimating someone because of their age is a dangerous mistake. It proved that sometimes the best revenge is not just personal satisfaction, but public service that protects others from similar harm. 3 months later, I received a letter from Jessica in prison. She wanted to apologize and explained that she had never intended for things to go as far as they did. She claimed that David had been the mastermind behind everything, and that she had been manipulated into participating in plans she didn't fully understand. She suggested that if I would provide character testimony at her sentencing hearing, she might be able to reduce her prison time and eventually rebuild her life. I wrote back with a single sentence, "I hope you live long enough to serve your full sentence, just like I'm going to live long enough to see you die in prison." It felt like the perfect ending to our relationship, which had begun with her lies and ended with my truth. Today, I'm 70 years old and healthier than I've been in decades. The stress of living with people who wanted me dead had been affecting my health in ways I didn't realize until it was gone. My blood pressure is normal, my sleep is restful, and my appetite has returned with a vengeance. I've lost the weight I had gained from stress eating and started exercising again for the first time in years. More importantly, I've rebuilt relationships with family and friends that Jessica had systematically tried to undermine. She had convinced me that I was becoming a burden to people who loved me, that I should minimize my contact with friends to avoid imposing on their busy lives. Now I understand that she was isolating me to make me more vulnerable and dependent on her and David. My social calendar is fuller now than it was when I was 30. I've joined 3 different organizations that work to protect elderly people from financial fraud. I volunteer at a crisis center that helps people escape from abusive relationships. I've even started dating again, something I never thought I would do after my husband died 25 years ago. The man I'm seeing is a retired FBI agent named Robert who helped with the investigation into Jessica's crimes. He says he's never met anyone with better investigative instincts or more natural ability to read people's true intentions. He's also never met anyone who can plan and execute such a comprehensive takedown of criminals without breaking a single law or compromising any ethical principles. We spend our evenings working together on consulting projects, helping other law enforcement agencies solve cold cases involving financial fraud against elderly victims. It turns out that my experience with Jessica and David gave me unique insights into how these criminals operate and how to catch them. I've helped solve 12 different cases in the past year, leading to arrests and convictions that have prevented dozens of additional victims. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled the situation. They wonder if I could have found a way to save David, to help him understand what he was doing wrong and change his path before it was too late. They question whether destroying his life was proportional to his crimes, especially since he was my son. My answer is always the same. David made his choices as an adult man with full knowledge of right and wrong. He chose money over family, greed over love, murder over patience. He chose to see his mother not as a person who deserved respect and care, but as an obstacle to his financial goals that needed to be eliminated. Those choices have consequences, and experiencing those consequences is the only way he might ever understand the magnitude of what he did wrong. More importantly, my response saved lives. Jessica would have killed me and moved on to her next victim if I hadn't stopped her. David would have continued helping her murder elderly people if I hadn't exposed their operation. The public awareness generated by our case has helped other families recognize and escape from similar situations. Sometimes protecting innocent people requires destroying guilty ones, and I have no regrets about choosing to protect the innocent. The last time I saw David was at his sentencing hearing 6 months after his arrest. He looked older, smaller somehow, as if the weight of understanding what he had done had physically diminished him. When the judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing, he looked directly at me and spoke for the first time since his arrest. He said that he understood now that he had lost the most valuable thing in his life when he decided his mother was worth more dead than alive. He said that he would spend every day of his prison sentence trying to understand how he had become the kind of person who could plan his mother's murder. He said that he hoped someday I might be able to forgive him, not for his sake but for mine, because carrying hatred was poison for the person carrying it. I stood up and walked to the front of the courtroom so he could hear my response clearly. I told him that I had already forgiven him, not because he deserved forgiveness but because I deserved peace. I told him that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing or pretending that terrible things didn't happen. I told him that forgiveness means acknowledging that people make choices, accepting that those choices have consequences, and moving forward with your own life instead of being trapped by other people's mistakes. Then I told him that while I forgave him, I would never have a relationship with him again. That forgiveness and trust are two completely different things, and that trust, once broken by planning someone's murder, can never be rebuilt. I told him that I hoped he would use his prison time to become a better person, but that his transformation would have to be its own reward because he would never have the opportunity to demonstrate it to me. As I walked out of that courthouse, I felt the final piece of my healing click into place. The woman who had discovered evidence of her own planned murder 9 months earlier was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone who understood that love without boundaries is not love at all but enablement of destructive behavior. The greatest gift Jessica and David gave me, without meaning to, was teaching me that I am not responsible for other people's choices and I am not required to accept other people's treatment of me just because they are family. I learned that protecting myself is not selfish but necessary, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive choices by absorbing the consequences of those choices yourself. Today I live in the same house where Jessica planned my murder and where I planned her downfall. But it's not the same house because I'm not the same woman. The rooms where I once worried about being a burden are now filled with friends and laughter. The kitchen where I cooked meals for people who wanted me dead now hosts dinner parties for people who appreciate both the food and the cook. The bedroom where I lay awake wondering if I would see another morning is now a place of peaceful sleep and pleasant dreams. I still make my famous cinnamon rolls every Christmas morning, but now I share them with people who understand that the greatest gift you can give someone is not money or property but respect, honesty, and genuine care for their well-being. I still tell stories about my late husband and our early years together, but now I tell them to people who listen because they value hearing about my life, not because they're calculating how much longer that life is likely to last. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when I'm sitting in my living room reading or working on a puzzle, I remember that Christmas dinner and smile. Not because I enjoyed destroying David and Jessica, but because I proved to myself that even at 60 years old, even after decades of putting other people's needs before my own, even after being targeted by professional criminals who had successfully murdered 3 other people, I still had the intelligence, strength, and courage to protect myself and others from evil. The old Margaret might have been a victim. The new Margaret is a force to be reckoned with, and anyone who underestimates her does so at their own peril. And that, more than any revenge I could have planned, is the true victory that came out of that terrible Christmas discovery and that triumphant Christmas dinner. Who owes me pays me isn't just the end of my story. It's the beginning of the rest of my life, lived on my own terms, by my own rules, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I own. And that life, rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal and deception, is more beautiful than anything I could have imagined when I was still playing the role of the sweet little old lady who didn't know she was being hunted. Some people might think that planning such an elaborate revenge makes me as bad as the people who plan to kill me. I disagree. There's a fundamental difference between destroying someone to steal their money and destroying someone to save your own life and protect other innocent people. There's a difference between betraying someone who loves you and exposing someone who betrays you. There's a difference between causing harm for personal gain and causing harm to prevent greater harm. Jessica and David chose greed over love, murder over patience, deception over honesty. I chose survival over victimhood, justice over silence, protection of the innocent over protection of the guilty. I sleep peacefully knowing that my choices saved lives while theirs would have ended them. And in the end, that distinction makes all the difference in the world.